A railway rail carries huge loads, hour after hour, day after day, through all the weather and seasons of the year. It is one of the most visible parts of the railway. It looks solid and indestructible, but rails do break. The true cause of a rail break could be a tiny microscopic defect, issues with the wider track system, or a change in temperature, a tiny problem that leads to a major derailment risk. How is it possible that these small things can break something made of solid steel? Before we get into the list of the causes, let's look at what a rail has to put up with in its daily life. A rail is supported at regular intervals by sleepers in a standard track construction. It is a continuous beam bridging the gaps between these sleepers that the train wheels run on. Those wheels carry huge loads, concentrated down to the small area where the wheel meets the rail. Each wagon, coach, locomotive or carriage has multiple wheels. All this means that as a train passes over a section of rail, the rail is subjected to a repeated cycle of loading and unloading. Depending on the frequency of trains over an area, this can mean that a rail is subjected to a huge number, possibly millions, of these loading cycles through a year. Each cycle creates contact stresses, bending stresses, and vibration in the rail's steel material. Why have we started here? Well, it sets the scene on how some of these causes, while seeming small and harmless at first, can develop into an issue and ultimately cause a rail to break. Defects that cannot be seen always bring their own element of risk. Internal defects is a name given to flaws, inclusions, or weaknesses within the steel material of the rail itself. Often these defects are present or created when the rail itself is initially manufactured. Two examples of internal defects are tache ovales and longitudinal vertical splitting, or LVS for short. Tache ovale means oval spot in French, which is the perfect description of what the defect looks like. Often shortened to TO, a tache ovale is a fatigue crack in the rail head, caused by excessive hydrogen in the metal of the rail during or soon after production. Another internal defect is LVS, caused by excessive hydrogen. This leads to internal cracking in the rail web along the rail length. In rare cases, this can even cause a slight bulge in the rail web itself, but it's not something you can rely on seeing. What makes internal defects such a risk is that they can remain completely hidden to visual inspection, only detectable via ultrasonic inspection. They start off small, even by microscopic standards, but grow under the repeated stresses of passing trains until they come big enough to cause a problem. High forces over a small area causes high stresses for the materials involved. This is exactly the environment that exists at the interface between the train wheel and the rail. The huge loads of the trains acting on a small area on the rail's head surface. Other factors can increase these stresses, including curves, traction and braking of the train, the level of cant applied to the track, and the track's gradient. These repeated stresses can create micro cracks at or near the rail's surface. Over time, these cracks can grow deeper into the rail itself. The most well-known surface defect is rolling contact fatigue, the defect that led to the deadly train crash at Hatfield in 2000. RCF, as it's commonly known, can appear in a number of forms, from head checking and gauge corner cracking to spooling and tongue lipping. The danger from RCF and other surface defects is not primarily the damage to the rail surface itself, it's the propagation or growing of the cracks. As they grow, cracks can join up, leading to parts of the rail breaking away. Wheel flats, wheel burns and impact damage are all caused by the train wheel. However, I've separated these defects out from RCF and the other surface defects purely for the reason that they're primarily caused by issues with the train wheel or the driving of the train, rather than through a material interaction mechanism. Let's take a wheel flat as an example. As the name suggests, a wheel flat is a flat spot on an otherwise round wheel. This flat spot will strike the rail at each rotation rather than smoothly rolling over it. These impacts create sudden, high dynamic forces in the rail. Similarly, wheel burns or skids caused by lack of train wheel grip damage the rail surface, causing localized material condition changes. These defects cause localized increases in the stresses exerted on the rail, often worsening an already defective section of rail. Rails need to be joined together to form the continuous running surface for the train wheels. In modern railways, the most common method is welding. Welds have many benefits over the traditional rail joints. They're not indestructible. When cast correctly, a weld between two rails is incredibly strong, but the process of forming a weld needs to be properly executed to achieve this strength. Incorrect preparation, poor execution of the welding process, or issues with the rails that are joined together, or even the surrounding track itself, can all lead to failure. But what does this look like in practice? Welding requires the rail ends to be aligned properly, and the weld itself to be set up correctly. Misalignments can add stress concentrators, which put the weld itself under greater stress, leading to failure. Poor setup can lead to issues with porosity, or even the molten metal running out of the mould altogether. A good, solid weld requires the new material to fuse with the existing rail ends and be as strong as the rail material. Lack of a proper preheat can cause lack of fusion at this interface. If the thermite reaction does not perform correctly, the resulting weld material may have lower strength than specified, meaning the joint is weaker than the rails it connects from the moment it's made. The welding process introduces an enormous amount of heat into the rails, and this can cause its own issues. As the rails expand, as metal does when it's heated, any defect or cracks that are already there will expand and worsen. These can be either internal defects or the surface cracks we've already covered. This can lead to those defects weakening the rail. So while the weld itself might look fine, the rail nearby is now weaker and ready to fail. Welding is still by far the best way to join rails. It just needs to be undertaken properly and with care. While joints have been replaced as the primary way to join rails, they are still found in most railways. They also still do fail, and a failed joint is considered a broken rail as it interrupts the running surface for the train wheels. Given joints are actually gaps between rails compared to a weld, they are inherently weaker. The bolt holes drilled as part of the joints also remove material from the rail, weakening it while creating stress concentrators. The majority of issues with rail joints are caused by movement, of which a certain amount will always happen, given it's a gap in the rail. It is, however, made worse if there is a lack of support either side of the joint. This leads to the joint itself flexing increasingly under each passing train. This in turn leads to increased loading and fatigue within the rail and the fish plates that form the joint. What failures do we see at joints? Cracked or broken fish plates, star cracking from bolt holes, and battered rail ends. A battered rail end is caused by repeated impact on the end of the rails at the joint. Both welds and joints look to achieve the same thing, the joining of rails, but each brings its own risks and its own failure mode. The environment in which rails find themselves can also be the cause of a rail break. The railway passes through various environments and experiences all different weather, so it shouldn't be a surprise that nature gets its own back at some point. Corrosion and pitting both lead to the loss of material in the rail, sometimes known as a loss of section. While corrosion can be across a wide area, pitting tends to be more focused but deeper, leading to a stress riser where cracks can begin. The rail foot, as the area closest to the ground, is often the part of the rail most affected by corrosion. This area of the rail is important to the overall rail's strength as it contributes to the rail's bending strength. It can also be harder to inspect visually underneath the rail foot, leading to corrosion progressing before being spotted. So where is corrosion most likely to occur? The quick answer is areas that are wet. This could be inside tunnels or areas with poor drainage. Another factor can be salt, such as coastal routes. One specific area to pay attention to is level crossings. At a level crossing, rails are covered, making them harder to inspect. Drainage is often poor, and road surface water often runs off onto the rails. And during winter, gritting salt can also come into contact with the rails. A rail with corrosion doesn't snap instantly, but is slowly weakened until it's unable to take the stresses of being in the track. The track is a system made of individual components that all work together. A rail isn't designed to work alone. It relies on support from pads, sleepers, ballast, and the formation to manage the forces of passing trains. Rails always move a certain amount under load, but if the support from any of these other components is poor or reduced, the rail bends more, and this is where the issues start. Voiding is the main culprit when it comes to poor support. It means that there is a gap between the bottom of the sleeper and the ballast below, so that when a train passes over, the sleepers are pushed down. This can be a particular issue at joints. Other issues can be poor overall ballast condition, failed pads, or underlying formation issues. Increased movement causes increased bending, which in turn can cause fatigue in the rail material over time. Fatigue can accelerate the deterioration of other defects that might be present. The rail may be the part that breaks, but the support underneath can be part of the reason it got there in the first place. If you want to understand the components that make up the track system, the sleepers, the fastenings, the ballast, the pads, and everything that supports the rail, I've put together a free Components ID guide. Download your copy at the link on screen, or find that link in the description below. Earlier, we spoke about how steel expands with heat. Well, the opposite is also true. The steel of the rails contracts when the temperature drops. Rails are fixed in the track, both laterally via clips and longitudinally via welds and joints. Continuously welded rails are installed to a target temperature, balancing the risk of buckling in the summer against the tensile forces that develop in the winter. In jointed track, rails can only contract so far before the joints get to their limit. When cold weather comes, the rails want to contract, but they can only contract so far. This puts them in a state of high tension, with a high level of tensile forces. If the rail already contains a crack, internal defect, a weld weakness, or corrosion damage, that sudden increase in tensile stress can make final fracture more likely. This is why it's typical to see a spate of broken rails during or just after the first cold snap of the year. So we've covered 8 different reasons for rail breaks: internal defects, RCF, wheel impact damage, weld defects, joint issues, corrosion, poor track support, and cold weather. The most important point, and the real lesson here, is that it's very rarely just one of these issues on its own that causes a rail to break. The process usually follows the same pattern. A weakness starts, it grows under the repeated loading of passing trains, and then something finally gives. Some examples of these combinations could be: a small surface crack begins at the wheel-rail contact point. Traffic keeps growing it. If grinding, inspection, or replacement doesn't happen in time, it can become critical. Hatfield, in 2000, is the starkest reminder of what rolling contact fatigue can become when intervention comes too late. A joint is poorly supported. The rail moves more and more under each wheel. Repeated bending and impact lead to cracking and eventual failure. Hither Green, in 1967, showed how a broken joint could lead to a catastrophic consequence. A wheel flap, or damaged wheel, repeatedly strikes the rail. If that rail already has a defect, and the support is poor beneath it, the crack may grow faster, and eventually that wheel strike might be the thing that pushes it over the edge. An internal defect, subject to the heat of a nearby weld, grows. The sleepers in the area are already offering poor support, which leads to bending and fatigue of the rail, increasing the rate that internal defect grows, finally leading it to break the rail. The rail might be the component that breaks, the visible failure, but the cause can be from a number of places across the track system. Good rail management is the key to preventing broken rails. This is done through inspection, ultrasonic testing, grinding, rail replacement, and seasonal management for temperatures. But the rail is rarely only part of the story. By the time it breaks, the failure has often been building through the whole track system for a long time.